All right, everybody. Welcome to the second of three sessions for our 2025 Virtual Spring Summit. Uh, John and Lydia are here. Unfortunately, Amy was not able to be here today, but we are wishing her the best in what she has to deal with today. So that's vague, but that's all I'm going to tell you that she and I connected, and she's not going to be able to be here for personal reasons. So hopefully, we'll be able to have her share at another point in time. Um, Housekeeping, thank you to our sponsors, Visit Lauderdale, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, and LA Tourism. If you just joined, be sure that you're using the chat function. Please feel free to put your LinkedIn and other contact info and thoughts along the way. Being on video is great because we know who's here and we can see your faces, and that's wonderful. If you have questions that you don't want recorded, please feel free to let us know, or you could send me a chat. You could say, "Hey, I don't want this recorded, but I want to ask," and we'll pause or stop recording. And with the next two sessions, if you've got to come and go, better for you to be here a little than not at all. So thank you and welcome. I already mentioned just a few minutes ago on the goal. We're trying to get $1,000 from this. So at this point, we're three-quarters of the way there. And yeah, let's stop sharing. That's enough. And I am going to kick it over to John Sage from Sage Inclusion, who's going to talk a bit about the variety of things that he does and accessibility overall for both destinations and events. So, John, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Thanks, Ronnie. And Ronnie, just I'm coming in, but I guess sharing slides would be preferred.
Yep,
Does that
you
work?
have
Okay,
access. Yep.
okay. All right, great. Uh, Thanks, Ronnie. Yeah, I'm John Sage. I'm CEO of Sage Inclusion and a couple other accessible travel companies, where we've worked with destinations and businesses, travel businesses, to help them become more inclusive, more accessible, really to achieve a return on investment on the accessibility work. Because if we can't make it profitable, it's probably not going to last. So the accessibility work does need to be profitable, and it is profitable if done correctly. I think where I want to start is really sort of on the needs of people with disabilities. And the reason we start there, and this is sometimes this is a mistake which travel businesses and destinations make. They think, okay, I've done this accessibility project and it's been a good project. I'm really happy about it. But ultimately, what we're talking about in travel business destinations is increasing visitorship, increasing bookings. And it's essential to understand the only person that decides if they're going to travel is the person with the disability. It's their needs. And so that has to be the focal point. It has to be, what do they need? It's not, do we feel good because we did an accessibility project? It's, have you made a difference so that they will spend their money? And so that's where I like to start. We've been doing this for 15 years for people with disabilities. And what we've learned is often what they use to decide whether they're leaving their home and which destination they're going to, often the criteria that they use and the things they're worried about are not really evident, or they're falsely reported by research. One I've seen studies that say that the door force on a hotel bedroom is the most common accessible travel barrier, and it is very common, but nobody determines chooses their hotel based on that. We just know it from speaking with people. So that's all background. Let me share a few slides with you to talk about what disabled travelers need, because they're the ones deciding where they're going to spend their money. Okay. And before I do, I need to talk a little bit about sort of the psychology of people with disabilities and travel. So I'm a manual wheelchair user. I get up in the morning and I get out of bed. I feed my daughter breakfast. I take her to school. I come home and I sit in my recliner on my laptop, and I don't feel disabled at all. I really don't. It doesn't even enter my mind. But when I start to travel, I start to run into unexpected accessibility barriers. And it happens on every trip that I take. And it's always something different. It's not like, hey, if you just have a checklist of things to take care of, then you just check these boxes and then it's accessible. No, accessibility is complex. And so it's always something different. What happens when I travel is that I start to experience some of these emotions down below. And those are negative emotions. They don't feel good. And when people with disabilities feel these emotions, they question sometimes, is it really worth it? Is it really worth me traveling? And the key message here is not that the disability causes these emotions. It doesn't. It's the accessibility barriers. Because my disability happens whether I'm at home or abroad or out of town. It's the accessibility barriers when I travel that cause these emotions. So, if any travel business or destination can address the accessibility barriers, then these emotions don't exist, and then people travel. So that's really a key is there has to be a focus on it. It has to be proactive. It can't be just, hey, come visit us. There's some work that needs to go into it beforehand. Few things on just statistics. So these are statistics from the U.S. Census. Um, they are there's different ways to group disabilities. These are how the U.S. Census does it. So I think it's as good as any. A methodology. It's 5 parts. It's mobility, vision, hearing, cognitive, sensory, which includes autism that we just heard about, and allergy. And you can see that even in mobility, it's not just about wheelchairs. There's mobility scooters, there's people that use crutches, there's slow walkers, there's amputees that may have challenge using one hand on certain fixtures in a hotel room. So there's all types of things that can happen, all types of disabilities that are beyond what we normally think of. Also, I'll mention a couple things that are important, and this sort of ties into Amy couldn't be here to talk about events, but one of the things that I think is really important, and we just heard about hidden disabilities. Well, it used to be called hidden disabilities, then it became non-visible is the preferred terminology. Now it's non-apparent is the terminology. That's a subcategory of disability. There are temporary disabilities where somebody planned their trip and then they're injured before the trip or before attending an event. And the last one is non-self-identified. So some some organizations have this idea that if I ask them if on my registration form I say, "Hey, what are your accessibility needs?" that they'll tell me and then I just take care of it and it's that simple. But it's not because people with disabilities don't always communicate their accessibility needs. It's just too tedious and it's just not something that they spend the time doing. And if you ask somebody, are you disabled? There's many people that will say no, but I can't walk a half mile. I can't walk up motor coach steps. And so this concept of non-self-identified is important. And this is really what I'll end sort of my intro on because it's so crucial. I include this in all of our training, all of our speeches. It's the 3 pillars of accessible travel. So what and this has been developed, this concept has been developed independently in multiple places, that there's 3 things. I've seen it originally, I saw it from Visit England. I've seen it by the US National Park Service. I've seen it elsewhere. Sometimes it's phrased differently, but this is it. And after planning thousands of trips for people with disabilities, I agree with this. This is a simple way to think about what disabled travelers need. There's 3 pillars. The first is facilities, and that is not only physical facilities, but it's also technology. It's also the digital environment. And facilities are largely addressed by national laws. Largely, I mean, that's what most people think of. They think of ADA compliance. However, the ADA has a bunch of gaps that people don't. A lot of people don't understand. There's a bunch of gaps with ADA compliance. The probably the biggest one is that ADA does not regulate furniture. So what does that mean? When I go into a hotel room, often the bed is too high for it to make it for a comfortable transfer. Even in the accessible room, they've bought the wrong bed type for the accessible room. It happens all over the place. Or the shower bench has been attached to the wrong wall and you can't reach the the shower controls while sitting in it, or the chair has been positioned in a way that I can't, even though I arrive at 10 p.m., I can't close the blinds. I have to call down to get somebody to come up and close the blinds. So there's all these things around facilities that are missed by the ADA. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is customer service, which is policies, processes, and training. I can get into more detail about what that is, but there is a person-to-person interaction, and there are processes, whether it's registering for an event or whether it's booking an accessible hotel room. There are processes that create accessibility barriers. And the last is the biggest miss by the industry. It is accessibility information. So if you go back to where I was saying that sometimes I travel, I run into these problems, and people with disabilities worry about running into these problems and having these negative emotions. The way that an organization or a destination can win their trust that they're going to have a good experience is through very detailed accessibility information. It's essential. And so often when you go to a hotel website, they may have 20 bullet points on accessibility, but they have no measurements and they have no photographs. And so people with disabilities largely don't trust that information. They don't trust the information that are on OTA websites. It's just not detailed enough. And we've all been burned so many times through incorrect information that we don't trust it. So we have to go through all these extra steps to call individual hotels, call individual attractions, ask questions. Most of the time, the person you get to first doesn't know the answer. So it gets rerouted. So you spend 40 minutes just gathering data for one hotel, and you haven't even decided if you want to stay there. So it's a tedious process, and you can sort of start to understand why some people with disabilities don't travel. It's because the industry is not meeting their needs, and so they stay home. But if the industry invests and is proactive about this, there's a huge number of people that are on the sidelines not spending their money in the industry who will if their accessibility needs are met. I could go on all day, but I know we have a lot that we want to talk about, and I would certainly want time for discussion and questions, so I will pause there.
Thanks, John. Lydia, if you're ready, would love to hear about what Frankenmuth has been doing and the fact that this is not actually a new thing. It's really been part of how you guys have operated for a while. That was interesting for me to learn. So would love to have you share.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me here, Ronnie. So my name is Lydia Walker, and I am the Director of Operations and Service at the Frankenmuth Convention and Visitors Bureau. My guess is many of you have probably not heard of Frankenmuth, but we're located 90 miles north of Detroit. We're known as Michigan's Little Bavaria, home to the world's largest Christmas store, two of the largest independently owned restaurants in the country. So we say that we're known for chicken and Christmas. That's kind of what put us on the map. But in terms of accessibility, as Ronnie mentioned, it kind of the roots are deep in Frankenmuth, kind of, I don't want to say not on purpose, but when our town was set up years ago, there was I forget what it's called. It was like the Frankenmuth 2000 plan or something like that. When they came in and they redid all of the streetscapes throughout our town, and we are very fortunate and blessed to have some very visionary business leaders that are invested in our local community. So when they did this plan, they made sure that at the time that our sidewalks were wider. Our main sidewalks in the downtown area are all heated, so we don't have to worry about snow in the winter on a good majority of our sidewalks. And then that's the case for some of our attractions as well. Um, and at the time, accessibility was, of course, on their mind, but one of the things that they always reference is strollers. Because we're a very family-friendly destination, the thought was you need room for strollers to get down Main Street. So whether somebody's in a wheelchair or pushing their newborn baby, there's room for them to explore Frankenmuth. So the roots are deep there in terms of accessibility, and how that's evolved over the years has always been kind of top of mind, but accessibility is such a big thing to try to tackle. As John mentioned, it's really those five categories: the hearing, the vision, cognitive, mobility, and allergies as well. So we at the Bureau actually had an opportunity in 2023, if I get my years correct, I believe it was fall of 23. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation put out an accessibility grant for the DMOs in the state of Michigan. And the grant could be used for a couple things, but one of the things included accessibility assessments. So at that time, we were really kind of diving in deep to accessibility. And I connected with Sage Inclusion at a number of conferences, DI and the Travelability Conference. So we partnered with them and submitted a grant proposal for them to assess about 50 of our properties for those 5 different disability categories.
Awesome. Would love to learn more about the work and interplay between you guys and John, and certainly feel free for both of you to share perspective on what that scope was like with the process. Where did it start, go, and where do you find yourselves now?
Yeah, so I will say, I kind of chuckled when I hopped on here. Whoever was speaking before me mentioned that the process took a long time. And I chuckled because that's totally relatable. Accessibility is something that's serious, but we also, it's not something you rush. We didn't want to just rush into something and put information on the website and have it be false. So that's why we did this accessibility assessment. So the assessments happened actually on site last fall. Sage Inclusion was here, and they've been working on all of those reports. We've gone back and forth trying to figure out, what information we actually want in those reports to make it usable for our businesses. So we're hoping to get those launched the end of July, beginning of August is when we'll start rolling out some of those reports to our businesses. And then from there, um, I see it as the DMO, it's our job to work with all of our partners to kind of weed through that information and then find ways to, supply that to our visitors. So, like John mentioned, making sure that you have measurements and pictures online and making sure you have actual useful bits of information instead of just saying, oh, we have wide sidewalks that are heated. So we're really digging into all of that content now to figure out how we can make it usable for our visitors.
John, is there anything on your side to share specifically for Frankenmuth and
Yeah, I guess what we did, you know, much of our work is really centered around those 3 pillars that I mentioned because they're just sort of the ground truth. And so that's exactly what we did is we evaluated the website accessibility for a bunch of local businesses in Frankenmuth. We evaluated the physical accessibility. That's the first pillar. We're training the staff both in the DMO and in the businesses and then providing detailed accessibility information that can be publicly available on the website. And the DMO website is, in most places, a very trusted website. And so, if there's accessibility information that's on the website, that that it's clear that it's not self-reported. A lot of the accessibility information on a DMO website that has a booking engine on there, it looks like it's self-reported, just like it looks like it on the OTAs, and so it doesn't really garner the trust. So we're providing the detailed information to be able to put on the DMO website that will be trusted.
thanks, John. So, Lydia, I'm going to call on you first. You cited Josh, so if you're around Josh and you want to chime in on this too, and then Laura also, Laura Highlands. I know that having been to your recent event, you guys had worked with Autism Travel Club. So my question for starting with Lydia, but anybody else really is about the partner side because over the past few years, and I'm peripheral to it, but I certainly have an awareness of a lot of the great work that destinations have been trying very hard to do to get their partners on board with accessibility in particular, but where some of those difficulties have lied. So I'm wondering, in terms of again, starting with Lydia, what techniques have worked? How have you convinced people to do it? Like, what's been that process? Because it seems to take a lot of time to get partners on board with accessibility.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing for us when we started this process was I knew in order for my partners to participate and be receptive, the communication was going to have to come from us. Um, just because I know my partners, I know how they're going to respond to things, I know how to word things in a way to get their response, hopefully. Um, so that was the first thing. And then similar to what John just showed on his slides, some of those like key like selling points, I guess you would say, of why this is important. I compiled all of that with kind of our vision as the DMO, and I put it on like an infographic, so they could share it with their staff too. Because when the team was on site, obviously I spoke to the manager. I didn't speak to all their frontline workers, but I gave them that information. So if they wanted to share it with their staff, there was an awareness for whoever they wanted to be aware of what was happening and why it was happening.
Thanks, Lydia. Josh, did you want to add anything in terms of getting partners on board? I know you talked about it a bit, but are there any techniques you've found that have worked to make things go faster, or maybe also the opposite, things you thought might work that you realized actually this isn't the way to get them?
Yeah, I've kind of faced all of that in the last 3 years. I will say if you can find somebody at a business or an organization that has some personal connection, that goes a longer or gets gets it done quicker. It's been, I mean, I've had the ups and downs. I've had some businesses that came to us and said, "We've got to do this." And then some businesses that have turned around and said, "Oh, well, that cost, I don't know, the return on investment." And you try to tell them everything, you know, try to tell them like, "Oh, well, I had a call from an LGBTQ community member that said because this hotel is certified autism, they believe that hotel cares more about different types of human beings and has more empathy for them. So I would rather go and book at that hotel because they're certified because I know they care about different people than go here." I've tried to tell them all the things, but and some scoff at the cost. Some say we're just too busy. Some people, unfortunately, in life, they try to make up excuses as to why not instead of try to get solutions done as to why do it. So, and some people it took 3 years. There's one organization out here where I bugged them for 3 years and multiple times, and then they finally have said yes. So I try to stay positive about it because I'm so passionate about it because it's personal to me. So I have to kind of temper my um, reactions. So anyway, that's been my experience, but I try to stay positive.
Thank you, Josh. Laura, did you want to add?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would reiterate both of those things, or all of the things that Lydia and Josh just said. I've run into those same issues, but I do think that probably the most important thing is that personal connection. And, kind of we've been meeting in small groups. We did a testimonial video from Ashley works with one of our chambers. I'm in a 3 county region, and she works for one of the chambers, but has a son who is on the spectrum and um, not real high functioning. But she went to South Carolina and went through the Autism Travel Club program and had an incredible experience. And so she came back just glowing, with recommendations about it. And we've made her kind of our unofficial ambassador. So anytime I have somebody on the fence, we kind of pull her in, or she'll come and attend meetings. And that video just really pulls at your heartstrings, and I think has done more than any of us have been able to do, with data and talking and everything. If you see it and you see the photos and you hear those heartfelt responses. Also, from the other side, if a partner is involved in that community, it seems to really help too. It's just one of those very personal things. And one of the reasons that we decided to go with Autism Travel Club is because it is kind of a low tech, low, they're there wasn't as much to certification. It's strictly kind of frontline training. And I felt like this was a good place for our partners to kind of dip their toe in and get involved with hopes of doing more later. But I do just think it has been a slow process, and just really that one-on-one, just trying to get them to have that aha moment of like, yeah, first of all, this is not going to cost a ton of money. It's not a huge investment, but it's going to make a big difference. And then tying it to the bottom line of, hey, all we're really doing is trying to be more welcoming and expand our market base from this community that's really looking to travel and wants to feel welcome.
Thank you, Laura. And I think it's interesting, right? Because in the case of Josh and Visit Greater Palm Springs, you have somebody there who's on staff who has that storytelling, the first person thing. And in the case of Laura, you have somebody who you've effectively deputized to do it. So whatever the circumstances, there is that ability to do that storytelling, whether that person's part of your day-to-day team or not. Wilma, I know you had your hand raised.
Okay. Lydia, on the accessibility assessments, did you all reach out to attractions? And the reason why I'm asking is because one of my attractions, Zip Nola, is a swamp zip line. They reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and they wanted to know if there are grants available because they want to offer complimentary zips for, what is this, throughout the year for accessible individuals. So this is small. It's a wonderful attraction, but most of our attraction is small businesses. So I was wondering, they was asking me, did I know where some grants were available for that? But I also wanted to know on your accessibility assessments, did you reach out to just attractions? Was that a part of it too?
Yeah, sorry. So I should have clarified. We did attractions, lodging, and restaurants, as well as some public spaces and parks and large pavilion that we have that hosts festivals throughout the year. So just try to do a wide variety of all of the things as much as we could at least. Um, I believe I'd have to double check because it's been a while since I looked at the list of businesses, but I believe so. We have an aerial park, um, and I believe we did assess them as well. Um, that was, I would say, one of the businesses where they kind of questioned, like, well, they thought it was just mobility. Why do we need this? We're a zipline park. This doesn't work for us. But I told them, if it's a large group of people, there may be, people that can do the zip lines, but there may be other people that just want to go and watch. Maybe it's grandma and grandpa that want to watch their grandkids. So to try to find some of that information for us to share. But to your question about grants for them specifically, I personally don't know of any. This grant that we got through the state was really the first one I'd ever heard of like this. I don't know, John, do you know of any other grant opportunities out there?
This is the state of Michigan did a matching grant, which was really unique. And so they would match what any DMO provided up to a certain threshold. No, I'm not aware of it being done on that scale. I will mention one thing about grants, though, is just a word of caution that d- I encourage people not to get into the mentality that, oh, accessibility only gets done if there's a grant. I mean, it helps, but grants are not sustainable. If a grant's a one-time thing, it's not going to come back and help things in the future. And we also want to be careful that, hey, people with disabilities are a revenue stream. They're not a charity case. And so it is absolutely profitable for any travel business or destination to invest in accessibility. It doesn't require a grant. So it's just something to think of that we want to think about in the right way.
And to that point, Wilma, also, um, in New York State, I know that there are those matching grant programs for tourism. I don't know specifically in Louisiana what there is or isn't for that, but the idea of having a marketing campaign or other things where if you look at the scope of it, to John's point, that actually it does stretch beyond potentially sometimes there's capacity building within those grants even if it seems like it's just about marketing and stuff, because you are appealing to that customer base. Laura.
Thank you. Well, Two things, a comment and then a question for the others. We did in terms of funding and subsidizing, that was another thing we did that kind of helps ease, entry, is we had a contribution from our largest lodging accommodation. Once in a while, they'll give a contribution to our foundation, and it was unmarked. And so we had asked if that would be a suitable use for the funding, if they would mind if we subsidized some of the training costs for our partners. So that has been helpful. Maybe if there is some revenue stream somewhere that, or if you have, like I said, we have a side foundation, it's not very large, but just for some of those kinds of things. And we kept it separate. We do have a lodging tax grant program. We kept it that runs through the counties. We kept it separate from that. This is just kind of using those unallocated contribution funds for this purpose, but it does help. I think even though we're not talking about a ton of money on either side, it does help kind of just make people feel better about it. So if there's a way to just even, give them some kind of incentive like that, I think that's helpful. And then the other question I had was, it's come up in some of our conversations with places like we have a facility called Touchstone Center for Crafts, which is really kind of a master crafts school, but they do some community classes and things like that. And their concern was, which they have actually signed on to the program, but so they're training their instructors and their staff, but if someone comes and takes a class alongside other members of the public who are not trained or don't know how to handle the situation, they felt like that still might be a problem. So they were asking about, could we do a special week or, a time period or event where you're saying it's, autism week, for lack of a better term. And, we're bouncing that around, but I haven't really landed on the best way to do that. So I'm wondering if anybody has done anything like that.
To clarify, Laura, you're talking about splitting up trainings for different audiences, or could you
Yeah, or
clarify the question?
designating like a week in August or something where you're saying that they would set up specific classes that would be outside of their normal programming.
So it's more about setting up specific timing for this specialized training is the question.
Yes. For
Um,
for people to come and participate, like for the, through the Autism Travel Club or something like that.
I'll let John respond to that, to answer that, or anybody else who has a thing. But quickly, I want to say from your prior comment, Wilma, I don't know how you guys are structured, but I do know that there are DMOs that have created or are in the process of creating separate 501c3s if they're a different structure, so they can be getting, even if it's a one-off, having that structure to be able to have that funding in a way that a C6, a membership association or a government entity aren't able to have. So again, I don't know what the River Parish's situation is if there is a separate C3, but that is something I've seen in different places. John, in terms of timing for training and Laura's question, did you have any feedback?
Well, I guess what I was actually thinking of, so I don't know if I can answer that specifically, but I do have something that I think is helpful, is I agree with everything that's been said on, hey, having a personal connection in a business helps move things through. Getting a grant can help initiate things. They see it as sort of a limited window, and so it creates a sense of urgency. And the ROI on tourism of actually increasing revenue, all three of those are accurate. I'll offer three more things that's sort of the business case. So one is that sometimes businesses and destinations don't move forward with accessibility, particularly the businesses. The destinations want to be welcoming. The businesses can be a little scared that, hey, we don't know if we can do a good job. And if somebody with a disability shows up and I don't know how to interact with them and I might say something wrong, that's kind of scary. So I'll say that training makes the people working in a business more comfortable and more likely to say yes. So I would say that a training component is essential. Also, unfortunately, in the U.S., a lot of people think about accessibility in terms of legal compliance. which is should not be the first thing you think of. You should think of the guest experience and the customer service, but that is what a lot of people think of. So one of the selling points can be, hey, we are going to analyze you according to the ADA so that you can fix anything that is against the law. And so that can be just, I hate to use, I really hate, as a person with a disability, I'm a manual wheelchair user. I hate to use fear to justify being providing me with a good customer experience, but sometimes that does get things through. It is focusing on compliance, and so when we do evaluate, we do according to the SAGE best practices, but we also do it according to ADA, and that helps get things through, get it approved. The last is that if we're talking about ROI, how do we really maximize ROI? How do you get it? If we're going to spend this much money, how do you maximize ROI? And what's often forgotten is accessibility is not just about leisure tourism. It's about business travel and meetings and events. And I've had a lot of discussions with organizations, part of the Global Business Travel Association. Um, gave a presentation down at PCMA for events. These event organizers and the business travel managers, they want to be accessible for everyone. I mean, for everyone. So they will choose a destination for a big event, for a 10,000 person event, based on the accessibility of just meeting the needs for a few people. And that purchasing power for that 10,000 person event is far bigger than me and my family traveling. And so I would just encourage that when accessibility is presented, don't forget about the meetings and events. The event organizers want accessibility certification. It's the easiest way for them to understand if accessibility is good. And so that can really help get things through the system.
Thanks, John. I want to ask Lydia one thing quickly to honor the event side, and then we'll keep this to a broader dialogue. Lydia, you mentioned festivals. Was there anything in particular around accessibility? Because we've talked kind of broader, but from the event side that you might be able to share.
So, I guess that's a little tricky. Our festivals kind of take over our town. So we're a town of 5,000 people, but we host a dozen at least festivals throughout the year, and our busiest festivals, I mean, will swell to like 150,000 people in a weekend. So in terms of, I mean, mobility is the first thing that comes to mind because when we're that busy, we don't have as much space. So we haven't dug a whole lot into dealing with the festivals in terms of like helping them through some of those things. I do know like some of our festivals will bring out additional parking, specifically handicap parking for those occasions. The pavilion that I referenced is a large kind of metal pole barn pavilion. And we assess that just from the standpoint of because a good majority of those festivals are hosted there, that we're hoping that the information that comes from the assessment they can then use when marketing to their attendees. So pointing them to wherever the ramps are or accessible bathrooms. And I mean, they looked at ventilation stuff while we were there too, because it's an indoor outdoor space. So we haven't dug a whole lot into that yet, but we will.
Thank you, Lydia. I'm going to invite Danielle to speak. And then after Danielle, if there's anybody else who wants to share about where your organization is at with your accessibility journey, what things you've done, again, Laura's question remains a bit unanswered, but if there's anything people can share in terms of trainings and process and all that, Danielle, I think your answer might touch on some of that stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Hi, everyone. Um, and I'm going to leave my contact information because unfortunately I have a call at the top of the hour that I have to jump to. But I just want to lean in a little on what John said. Leading a regional DMO in the state of Oregon that is certified, autism certified. I have my autism certification through IBCCES as well. It's a massive process. It's an undertaking to get the support, the funding. A lot of boards and organizations that don't have a lived experience and have not traveled with a child that's on the spectrum or a family member of the deaf community or who is a wheelchair user, they can't tie accessibility with measurable outcomes until you show them that there's economic impact. There's case studies that show ROI and improved destination accessibility scores. That data really helps justify continued investment, but sometimes it does take a budget cycle to say, hey, we're going to plan for this and plan ahead. There's also there's different sponsorship programs that we were involved in at the regional and the DMO level to get that public-private partnership going. And also, T-bids. So, is there an opportunity in your destination to look at additional business investments regarding the taxation in your community with tourism lodging tax? So without that dedicated budget, it's you can get creative though. But the other thing I really want to emphasize, and this is kind of in alignment with Coraggio, who I now represent, and Miles' partnership, leaning into our partnership with Sage Inclusion, is leading with strategic alignment, right? Like going from 20 plus years in the DMO space to now being in the consulting space, you have to frame it as a gateway decision. It's a first step to conduct that accessibility assessment and lead with alignment. So your partners have to be in the same mindset, and you have to use risk and opportunity language, right? Like we are at an inflection point. Your competitors, if you're not already moving into this space with accessibility, even if you just look at how many retirees we have annually that are going to end up needing canes and assisted devices because we have an aged population that's going to be traveling. So it's not just, my aunt who's deaf and I worry about her recreation on the waterways because she can't hear motorized boats. It's thinking of our aged community as well. And that's definitely an entry point into this. But also making the ask specific and time bound. So if you're looking for formal endorsements in the accessibility assessment phases, again, making sure you have the proper alignment. We've got great speakers on here today. I was not planning on coming off mute. But there's a lot we can learn from each other and just connecting to coexist, right? And create those opportunities from these networking potential. Laura, to your comment or your question rather, in talking about classes and different groups and educating different teams, when I took my regional DMO, and this is, of course, the region was over 7 counties, we actually did a phased approach. So it was our organization and our board of directors first and foremost. Then we went out to the communities. Then we went out to our destinations. So it was really regional DMO down to the DMO, the frontline staff first, those who were connected and having the touch points with communities. Then we started integrating restaurants who were interested, the carousels that were already, there was some low hanging fruit of figuring out who was already doing what in the community. And we elevated that as a marketing opportunity to partner with them. So we really did look at it through that lens of who's interested, how can we group some of the funding. I heard someone mention co-ops. I think, John, you mentioned this. Some states are willing to co-fund different resources and opportunities. So, but there's also EDA grants. There's other things, again, leaning into what John said. You need to find some stable and consistent funding, and that's where T-bids and other private partner sector partnerships come in, or public-private sector partnerships come into play.
Thank you, Danielle. We're lucky to have John. I always feel lucky that John takes part in these. He's been part of the National Travel and Tourism Advisory Board. He goes around the world talking about this. So, is there anybody who has particular questions around accessibility from a professional standpoint? And also, as he's mentioned, he's a manual wheelchair user as well. So, any questions for John in terms of disability and accessibility overall, in terms of how you might apply it, and then also his lived experiences, if anybody has anything there.
Ronnie, if no one else, or whenever we do questions for John, when he's done, I have a few other things that I wanted to say in answering Laura's question earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll mention one thing that may be helpful. Is one of the questions we get a lot is, how do we get started? How do, particularly destinations, how do you get started? And what we've seen is there's really 3 ways that destinations start on accessibility. So one is to do the big project that like what we did for Frankenmuth, is send people in to evaluate accessibility at lodging, attractions, restaurants. I mean, you go in with tape measures, you go in with door force measures, with lighting measurement tools, all this. That's sort of the big. You can do it all in one go. It's possible to really make yourself a attractive destination for people with disabilities. Um, that does typically, with the price tag, it takes an annual cycle. It's not something that's going to get approved immediately. So there's two other ways that can get started a little more quickly. One is in the destination master plan to incorporate accessibility into that. That's much cheaper. It does not require flying people in to the destination. And the quickest way to get started, which is really the lowest hanging fruit, is to train the DMO staff. Uh, there are usually training budgets that exist, and training's not very expensive, and it can be for the whole DMO staff or just a subsection of the staff. But to really bring awareness up so that everybody can be on the same page about speak the same terminology and formulate and agree on a path forward. A training does really help as well.
Thank you, John. Josh, I'll let you chime in after this. Danielle John wrote in the chat about outdoor rec and adaptive recreation. Is that anything you can speak to in terms of opportunities? Because I do know we have some destinations that have, those outdoor experiences too.
It is. It's attractive at the same time. It's one of the things that I sort of say is it's great to see a video of somebody getting carried to the top of a mountain. It's really inspiring and everything. But you know what actually makes a difference is getting permission in a cruise port to bring the accessible van up next to the ship. Like, it's not really exciting. It's not, the media's not going to report on it, but it helps a huge number of people if they don't have to walk half a mile out of the cruise port. And it's just a permission issue. So outdoor recreation, there's definitely the market for it, but it's probably not as big as retirees with bad knees that kind of just want to move at a little slower pace.
Thanks for that perspective. Josh, you wanted to share more?
Yeah, just real quick. Laura, you talked about like, did anybody else have something where they do a class where you do the training all at once or, include a bunch of people, right? Am I kind of correct about that question? So we have something here at Visit Greater Palm Springs called Team GPS, and it's a class that we give out to the community, but it was designed for the hospitality industry to tell people more about our destination, because a lot of people around here for a long time were like, there's nothing to do here, go to Vegas or go to LA. And it was kind of a bad thing that like servers at restaurants were telling that to guests. So we created this Team GPS to tell everybody about it. And we give that away. And part of that is if you do our Team GPS, we will get the minimal training block from IBCCS, the 30-minute minimal broad course, and we will give that to them as well, like complimentary. So that's something we do. It's not like a group thing, and it's not like we pick a week and do it, but it is something that we do. And I did also want to touch on something that Dawn was talking about, and just some of the other stuff about city grants. Of course, we're a DMO that covers 9 cities. When on this journey of doing the autism thing, I started, even though I was going to mixers and meeting people on city councils, I finally started going to city council meetings and going to the public comment and asking them to set aside money to help businesses get certified. And one of our cities, the city of Palm Desert, fortunately, their city council was very receptive to this, and they did set aside a small grant. And the great thing about that is that even though the cities, all the 9 cities, they try to work together, there's also a fear of missing out thing. So once Palm Desert made a grant, now all of a sudden I'm going to other cities going, well, Palm Desert did it. What about you? Why won't you do it? And then some of them are starting to fall in line. One of them, the city of La Quinta, I had small business owners contact me about the program, and they wanted to do it, but they couldn't afford it. And I said, well, look, I've gone to the city council and asked them to set aside a grant to help you out. It's going to go further if you go to the city council. And sure enough, when those business owners went to the council and started bugging them saying, well, why aren't you doing what Palm Desert's doing? Now all of a sudden La Quinta's coming around going, well, our business owner, our constituent in our city, they want this. let's make it happen. If Palm Desert can do it, we can do it. So that's just another thing that I've experienced. So don't be afraid to reach out to your city councils and to say, hey, this is an investment that will pay off, that we will, that will pay off, that we're investing in being accommodating. So anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Josh. All right. Well, thank you, John and Lydia, for everything you shared today. I'm going to close things out actually with some of the things that we did talk to Amy about, and if there are any folks who want to share very quickly in terms of for events, some of the things that they've seen. So one, I will say, Travel Unity does have standards both for organizations and for special events and sports, and this year we are due for a revision of these. For anybody who wants to participate in that process, please do reach out. But these do include a variety of things that point to how to be more accessible and inclusive within festivals, trade shows, conferences, and sporting events. Some of the things that came up from talking to Amy was the idea of captioning. I was in an event that I spoke at in Illinois, and what they did was they just pulled up Zoom, pulled up captions, and then they had me on a mic and they recorded it so there were live captions through the Zoom link they were doing. Um, some of you might know Christy Durso. We were at ASTA last week, and she was very excited and saw this as progress that on the ASTA website, they just listed some accessibility resources. So, again, being thoughtful on these things, I think one thing, as you're considering accessibility overall with reasonable accommodations, letting people know what the time frame is for those requests for events is very important. Another thing that doesn't always get attention are people who don't drink alcohol. John mentioned the dietary side during his point, and there are a variety of reasons people don't drink alcohol, and there are many events where that is the kind of main social aspect to them. So, how do you have mocktails or other ways to think about that? Um, One thing that she brought up that was pushing things even further, and again, this is something for a big event or for to be aware of as a request, or to have event escorts for blind attendees was something that Salesforce, Dreamforce started doing. And then I'm sure a lot of us have seen sensory rooms as becoming kind of toward the norm, in all honesty, for conferences. John, was there anything you wanted to add for events and inclusion, especially for somebody who I've been to events and have seen some of the things that you've personally contended with?
Yeah, I guess the main thing is to not rely on being reactive. Don't rely on the person with the disability always raising their hand and communicating their needs in advance. It does a proactive approach is really, really helpful. Also, as event organizers, a lot of times they only focus on the event itself, in the conference center. But the person with disability, that's probably not where they're going to have most of their accessibility barriers. It's going to be in the accommodation. So anything you can do to help potential attendees, help them choose their hotel because you've already gathered the accessibility data, that's going to be a big help and a determining factor if they attend or not.
That's a great point, John. So it's not just, hey, what's happening in that room, and can somebody, with a mobility device get through all the chairs, which is something to consider, but how did they even get there from the airport? Can they get into their room? Does that room fit their needs and all of that? All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this session and move on to our final session of this virtual summit. So thank you again to John, Lydia, and everybody who chimed in today. Thank you to our sponsors for our virtual summit, Visit Lauderdale, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, and LA Tourism. We'll come back to that. And yeah, stick around for our next session, and we will wrap up this recording.